Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Informal cooperation agreements between the ANC and EFF and provinces are said to be causing some discomfort with the ANC's national leadership. The result has shifted power away from the Democratic Alliance and Gauteng metros and are set to dethrone the IFP in key KwaZulu-Natal municipalities. This matter and that of the electricity ministry is also likely to further divide the governing party. Let's speak now to political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe. Professor, good morning and thank you very much for your time. I must say, a very interesting development coming from the weekend's papers, but some are saying it's more of a confirmation really, because many had saw it coming, that the decision of the provincial government to work with the EFF could make certain national leaders a bit uncomfortable, given that the EFF has made it clear that they want President Ramaphosa out of office. Your views on all of this?
We are seeing different dynamics. There are dynamics that are taking place at the national level, and there are dynamics that are taking place at the local level or provincial level. And the issue is that politics is about responding to those dynamics. And at the local level, the ANC or provincial level can actually see that the party is losing its market share of the vote, in as much as it is also doing that at the national level. So the issue is, if you are faced with the possibility of losing a market share to rivals, you also try to find arrangements and coalitions, and that brings about the different permutations. And those permutations may not in themselves be aligned to what the party faces at the national level. Mm-hmm. But the challenge that the ANC has is that it doesn't have a position, even at the national level. The only position it has, it's about being in power. So you find the party almost talking left, but walking right. And that creates a sense of confusion at the provincial level. So what we are seeing is what you call realpolitik. The members of the ANC at the provincial level want to command support, in as much as those who are at the national level want to do so. And what they do, they will try to find who can we work with. So effectively, the politics on the ground are beginning to dictate in the same way that the voters are dictating. The ANC has been losing support at the national level, and we see this also happening at the provincial level. And the members cannot just sit and idly and work with parties that are seen not to be close to the people. So this is about really the soul of African people. The ANC has come to a determination that it does not own black people, especially at the provincial level, where there's a fierce competition. And the provincial leaders are simply reacting in a way that politicians will do to make sure that they gain a market share.
Now, Professor, it may be beneficial for the provincial government of the ANC, but broadly speaking, is this not to the African National Congress' detriment? Because here it almost suggests that there's some sort of a federal governance system where you allow greater independence or autonomy to the provinces. Because if we look at the manner in which the EFF approaches coalitions, we have seen some sort of a top-down approach that is actually executed to the T. Most recently, the party took issue with the attitude of the IFP in Umhlatuze. They then took a national position that they would sever ties across the country. But then if we're going to have an ANC perhaps in the province, looking at the material conditions on the ground and taking decisions that might look as though the party holistically is not aligned, would that not be detrimental just in the long run for the political party, if you compare it to the way the EFF is approaching its governance?
Well, what you see here is also a reflection of leadership. The EFF has a leadership that goes time and again to say this is the line of march. It gives direction. What you have with the ANC, it reacts after the fact. If the party at the national level was very clear that we are going to work with these people because they stand for this, because there is a logic to our approach, then you wouldn't have these challenges. Yes, you are actually quite correct, but at the same time, it could also boomerang for the ANC, where it also begins to lose support on the ground because the national seems so disconnected. What the provincial and local people are dealing with are the real politics, and those politics, in the end, they do contribute or have a cumulative effect in terms of the support of the ANC at the national level. We must also understand that the people who vote at the local level are the same people who are going to vote at the national level. So the extent to which they are treated at the provincial local level will also have an impact. So the ANC needs to have what you may call a unifying logic or framework or an ideology that guides, so that once you have that, then members at the local level, the provincial level, will know who they can work with, who they cannot work with. In the same way that the EFF has been able to show that level of command. So what you have in the EFF is a clear message that this is the line of march. In the ANC, because there's a lot of confusion, even at the national level, there's also infighting within the ANC. It is very unclear what the ANC stands for, other than some people wanting to remain in power. And when you have that, you have a position that they are expedient at the national level, and that expediency will percolate downwards within the local and provincial levels.
And with the EFF, it's not just a message that is being verbalized. I went through their constitution. In every part, where you look at the provincial structures, the CCT is still needed there. There would be an aspect, the wording would be clear, that with every decision or most of the decisions that must be taken, there must be some sort of concurrence with the CCT. So the central command must concur with all of these decisions. But when you look at the ANC's constitution, particularly Rule 19, where you look at the powers of the provinces, to a greater extent, it looks as though, when interpreting it, it looks as though if the ANC now took issue with the decision to work with the EFF, they really would have very little room to maneuver and discipline Gauteng, because some of the decisions that have been taken, they were well within their rights to do so.
No, you are quite correct. And hence, any party that does not have a coherent message risk exposing itself to these diversions of perspective and approaches. So, but part of it is that the ANC has long declared itself to be a broad church. And while that sounds very attractive and politically seductive, it has a problem of that we don't have where we stand. And if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything that is presented to you. And this is what is happening on the ground and at the national level. But also, I think the provincial leaders themselves are also saying we have it's a declaration of no confidence in the leadership, because they don't know what the leadership stands for. If you listen to the comments that were made by even some of the ministers and some of the people who are in the top six of the ANC, they will tell you that even when the president made announcements, some of the announcements took them by surprise. For instance, if you have somebody who's a national chair like Gauteng, who has reportedly indicated that it was the first time that he had heard of a minister of electricity. That actually tells you that even at the national level, even within the officials, there's lack of clarity.
Even KwaZulu, even the alliance partners were unaware. Apologies for interjecting, but even KwaZulu. Last week on Friday, we spoke to Sipho, and she said they weren't aware. They do not know if it's going to be for a particular period that there is an electricity minister, and then after the crisis is done away with, then that particular portfolio will be done away with. They literally said they didn't know, even just at a political level, that maybe they were conceptualizing perhaps bringing in a new ministry. Just at that level, they didn't know.
Yeah, well, that actually proves the point that the center does not hold. And also that you have to ask, if senior people in the ANC and senior people in the alliance say we are clueless, then the question is, where does the president get his orders? Which constituency is he responding to? So it is that which makes it possible for the provincial structures to march to a different drum. But maybe one could say that that's a challenge that comes with being in power, that you have to juggle and balance. But the message that is emerging is that the center does not hold, and the leader is only acting based on some instructions from elsewhere, not from the structures that are within the organization and within the alliance partners. And that is a crisis of leadership.
Professor Seepe, we've just received reports that Randall Williams, the mayor of Tshwane, has resigned. Your views on that? There's been quite a lot of difficulty with the Democratic Alliance, particularly the mayor, insofar as Tshwane is concerned. I mean, last week or 2 weeks ago, we were even reporting of buses not having diesel.
Well, I mean, the DA has always argued that where it governs, it does it better than all other parties. And what is emerging is that, except for a few spaces, but we must also be careful in saying that, because when it comes to the notion of clean audits, you find that the municipalities that are run by the DA tend to do better. So that story is still valid. But what you find in Tshwane, it's a serious contestation that continues, but it also reflects a serious contestation within the party itself. When you have somebody who used to be an ex-mayor of Johannesburg saying, "I'm going to challenge the party president of the ANC or of the DA," that actually tells you that here within the DA all is not well, and the chances of how the DA has also dealt with the race question remains also a bigger challenge, because they don't want to talk about it. They want to be seen as non-racial. But the issue of race is something that will always be there. But it is also possible that Randall Williams' resignation has more to do with the challenge that he faces as a mayor. And also
perhaps
the
that 10 billion wasteful expenditure. Because that was a very big one just at the start of the year when we got that Auditor General's report. I mean, 10 billion, in as much as he stated that the CFO was concealing what was happening and he was actually paying SARS. There was a lot that was stated, but one would possibly assume that that on its own could have been the final nail.
Yeah, well, it could be also be pressure. Fortunately for the ANC, which is both it's what you call it, it's both a weakness and a strength, is that when these things happen within the ANC, the reasons are largely known. I mean, except where the president does his own thing, but it is known that the president, this is his call and nobody else's call. But within the DA, you see people just resigning. And only when they've joined other parties do they then tell us why they actually resigned. But with Randall Williams, what you might be having is really that there has been a clear governance failure and administration maladministration. And as a result, the pressure has been so much. But also because the DA itself internally is combustible, it also makes one to say, do I have to really stand for this? Is it not easier for me to move out and pursue other interests? So until he gives us the reasons why he has resigned, all this will be speculative.
Then I want to take you to the imminent reshuffle that wasn't so imminent after all. What are your views on the pace at which it's taking the president to reconfigure his cabinet? Because there were talks like last week when we saw the swearing in of, among others, Paul Mashatile. Many had assumed that they were rushing him to parliament because there was probably an intention to reshuffle just ahead of SONA. It didn't happen, and now many are asking what was the significance of it happening last week?
Anybody who has followed the career of the president, that he is a person who hides behind consultation. But what he's trying to do is to be forced into a particular corner. He lets the decision to be made by pressure groups, by the media, where the media is going to identify certain people as ones who should be chopped. And when there's an overwhelming movement towards that view, then he acts. And when he acts, he knows that there'll be no reprisals at the level of support. So you have somebody who's very indecisive, but will always hide behind consulting. But of course, at the same time, when you have a president who is now seen to be making decisions without consultation, then he has to tread very carefully. But his posture is that they put your head in the sand for a while, and when the dust is settled, then there'll be clear victims or people or targets that will have been identified, and then you go for those, and you are seen. But he is definitely not a president who's resolute. He's definitely not a president who's decisive. It's also a president where people are second-guessing what he's actually all about.